This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
After shooting a little soccer, a little basketball with Canon's new flagship, the R1, I'm not gonna lie. I have some mixed feelings about this one. Full disclosure, Canon flew me out to Phoenix to test out the R5 II and the R1. They had no input on this video, nor did they get to see it prior to launch. And we only had a day to test the camera. So this is gonna be a very, very brief first impressions of the R1 coming from someone that really enjoys using the R3 for my sports photography. Before I go on my little rant, let's just start off with some of the basics, the important, like what makes the R1 a flagship camera. This has a new backside illuminated 24 megapixel stack sensor. It can shoot up to 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter, extremely fast readout speed, and you can get up to 230 photos in one single burst. It retains a mechanical shutter, the same one that's in the R5 II, so it gets 12 frames mechanical, which is great. Because cameras like the Z9 with extremely fast readout speed, even then, I will still at times get banding when I'm shooting with flash. You get a blackout free, massive, big and beautiful EVF. We'll talk about that later. You get pre-continuous shooting up to 20 shots. This is the same one that's in the R5. Also sharing with the R5, you get in-camera upscaling, which is an AI upscaler in camera where you can process a RAW to JPEG or a JPEG and just make it larger. We'll speak on that in a little bit. And also it has a neural network noise reduction feature in camera. Canon really pushed the fact that this camera is a very good high ISO shooting camera. The ISO goes up to 102,400. I think we're thinking the same thing here. Why didn't they put a high resolution sensor in this camera? Okay, let me try to play both sides here. The head photographer at Wrigley Field, and I was there like a week and a half ago, he shoots with the A1. And I asked him why didn't he upgrade to the Sony A9 III, because it can shoot up to 120 frames per second in RAW with this global shutter. He said the only reason he isn't upgrading was because he needed the extra megapixels. That's what I assumed it was. But what he would do is just crop in camera. In the A1, you can crop in camera, and then he would deliver those JPEGs as is with no edit. And I understood that. I get it. But on the other side of the fence, I can understand why someone only wants 24 megapixels. And, it still allows room for cropping, less storage, and all those other reasons why you would want a 24 megapixel. Whichever your priorities are, let's try to look at this objectively. Canon already has a 24 megapixel speed demon out there right now. It's called the Canon R3 that can shoot 30 frames per second with zero rolling shutter. Has great image quality and autofocus. I still think it has one of the best autofocus systems out there right now. Like, if the R1 doesn't have a special capability like being able to shoot close to 120 frames per second, even if it's in JPEG like the Z9 can, I just don't think it makes sense putting another 24 megapixel in the R1, right? A part of me also thinks that this is why Canon made the R5 II so capable. And part of the reason why it shares so many of the same features with the R1 is that it is a legitimate high-resolution alternative to something like the R1 or the R3. But still, I still think this is a missed opportunity. I can't help but sit here and feel like the R1 feels more like an R3 Mark II. But who am I to talk? I am not a professional sports photographer. I shoot sports, but I'm not doing it professionally. So if you are a professional sports photographer, I would love to hear what you think in the comments below. Looking at the image quality of the R1, so I was somehow able to open up the RAW files in the R5 II, but I wasn't able to open up the RAW files on the R1. So I'm just gonna go based off the JPEGs, right? Most of the photos that I took on the R1 were around 4,000, 5,000 ISO. And they looked suspiciously clean. I mean, clean with very little noise in the shadows. But the thing is that when I zoomed into the photos, it seemed like there was some in-camera noise reduction going on in the background. Because when I zoom into the skin tones and the skin of the players, it definitely looked like that denoisy, pasty, it had that denoisy, pasty look to them. But I can't confirm nor deny that there is some noise reduction happening. This is a pre-production camera, and these are just the JPEGs. So I'm curious to see what the RAW files are going to reveal about the R1. The autofocus on the R1, this might be the best autofocus system that I've ever experienced. And I don't remember what the A9 III was like, but the reaction time of the autofocus and how it just knows exactly where to focus at that very, very split second was so impressive. And it does it so damn fast. I mean, it literally feels instantaneous. And I'll have a couple of examples of like that split second instant moment. It grabs that person. So a lot of the rumors said that this was going to have a quad pixel autofocus system. That is incorrect. It has a new cross type autofocus system that has never been implemented in any other camera. I don't know how to explain the technical version of this, but all I know is that I can feel the difference when tracking people with this camera. I can feel it, I can see it, especially compared to the R5 II. Just like in the R3, the R1 has the same smart controller button right here. And you can map this button to do different things now, right? So originally, like on the R3, you can use this to move your focusing point around just by simply touching the surface here. You can move it around, right? And now you can customize it in two different ways, right? So I can half press this button and that'll be an action, and then full press, that'll be another action. It's a creative way of just making better use of that smart controller. And that could be a really powerful tool for people that need to make a quick adjustment on the fly. The R1 also has the new eye control 2 feature. And I spoke about this in length in my R5 II video that I just released with this one. But the eye control that they debuted actually in like 1989, 1990, but it was in the R3. I thought it was such a great feature. It helps with, you can never move your focusing point faster than you can move your eyeball. And this is a eyeball tracking focusing system. People always tend to confuse that when I say this, or when they hear eye control, they think eye autofocus. It's not. It's eye. You're controlling the focusing points with your eyeball, and wherever your eye goes, it will find that and lock onto that person. It is extremely well implemented, much better than the R3, because calibrating it over and over, shooting vertically, I was getting more consistent results. I always got good results shooting horizontally. This is one feature that separates the Canon R5 II and the R1 from anything else on the market, because this is completely unique to Canon, and it is so good. So now, circling back to that new AI upscaling feature in camera in the R1 and the R5 II, I can't help but think that this is kind of perfect timing with the release of the R1 with the 24 megapixel sensor. So with this new feature, I can take a RAW file coming out of the R1 or even a JPEG. It'll process it to a JPEG and then get around a 96 megapixel JPEG. And I'm assuming this was put in place to, if the 24 megapixel file is not big enough, I could quickly do it in camera. And it does it really quick. For an R1 user to have something like this in camera, if you get that absolute money shot and you need to send a larger version of that, this could be a very interesting feature. But I think we didn't have enough time, plain and simple. There is also this thing called neural network noise reduction. This is another AI-based feature in camera. And this, we've seen how noise reduction has progressed in software. This is great for sports photography or anyone that has to make a quick deliverable. The ergonomics of the R1 are also very interesting. So first off, you have a 9.4 million dot EVF, which is the biggest and brightest that I've ever seen in a full frame camera, with 0.9 magnification. This is similar to the one that's in the A1, but it's hard to ever go back from looking at an EVF this beautiful, big and bright. The R1 feels like a fatter, heavier R3. It's a stretched out R3. You definitely feel it's only about 150 grams heavier. So it's on the R1 is 964 grams. But it feels more substantial than just that because the R3 is more compact, and I feel because the weight is less, is the camera's wider, the weight is not distributed the same way, so it does feel much more sturdy and rugged in the hand for sure. Unlike the R3, the R1 has dual CF Express Type B card slots, so I guess that is in one way makes the R1 a more professional camera. The R1 for video, it shoots up to 6K 60p RAW internal at 60, 30, and 24 frames per second. You get 4K up to 120 frames per second. You have access to C-Log 2 and 3. Just like the R5 II, you are getting a bunch of new file formats, very similar to the ones that are in the Cinema line. You get access to pre-record shooting, false color. The R1 actually shares a lot of the same features with the R5 II overall, but one of the more unique ones is how you're able to record photos while recording video at the same time. This is unfortunately limited to 1080p though.
All right, I want to jump in here really quickly and tell you about today's sponsor, Squarespace.
Squarespace makes it so easy and seamless to set up a website for your business, whether that's an online store, a blog, or a personal site like mine. Squarespace has this thing called Blueprint AI that gives you unique design and styling options to best align with your brand. A feature that can give your site some personality. I'm currently tinkering with it right now because I plan on doing an entire redesign pretty soon. It's also been effortless to manage my online store, selling my presets, and even more recently, I've been building out an appointments feature that will allow my viewers and site visitors to schedule a mentorship call with me in just a few quick steps. So if you use the coupon code Manny, you will get 10% off your first purchase with Squarespace. So check them out. Link will be in the description.
My initial thoughts of the R1 after my short time in Phoenix, the way the camera feels in the hand is something that I think 1DX users are going to appreciate, but I personally still prefer the size and weight of the R3. The large GVF and the clarity, it's gonna make it hard to go back to a normal viewfinder. It's so big and bright. The new cross-type autofocus system could be one of the best, if not the best autofocus system in any camera right now, especially when you factor in the eye control too. Being able to shoot 40 frames per second raw is about as fast as anyone will ever need. The big question here is it really worth upgrading from the R3 when you consider the fact that they have the same resolution sensor? The R1 can do almost everything a little better than the R3, but by today's standards, how camera tech overall has hit a plateau, like I can't sit here and say that it feels like this is a huge leap in performance. But hey, these are just my first impressions. I hope to get a production model soon so that I can go shoot some Major League Baseball with it. For now, I'm gonna try to enjoy this vacation, this all-inclusive vacation where I don't have to worry about anything, 24-hour room service. I'm gonna come back maybe a little plump. It's much needed.